In this section, I'll look at two migrant films that foreground the process of bordering and the capacity of bodies in movement to reveal the movement of the world around them. The films are Loach's It's a Free World and Paulikovsky's Last Resort. The former about a British single mother who makes a living bringing migrants to the UK and exploiting them. The latter about a Russian woman who comes to England to join her British fiancé, is dropped by him, claims asylum, and is taken to a detention centre in an old British seaside resort. I'll first look at bordering as a process and the relation between the movement of migrants and the movement of the world. Typically, we think of borders as products of nations. Coherent nation-states come first and possess unified cultures, symbols, languages, polities, and markets. The border is simply a protective line drawn around this existing identity. A more adequate understanding recognizes the priority of borders. Borders actively produce the coherence and separation of bounded entities. Their everyday work continuously produces nations, in the same way that performative linguistic utterances produce the reality they name. Not simply a barrier, borders are porous. Their active work of sifting and ranking tells us who belongs where and can do what. Because bordering is a process, borders are subject to change. They appear to be weakening in the age of globalization, as goods, finance, and people flow. This seems especially so in Europe, with the fall of communism, EU expansion to the east, and the establishment of the Schengen system. It could be argued, however, that they are multiplying as, border guards despite ourselves, more and more of us are required to check identities and rights to work. The digital revolution signals an explosion in virtual bordering. Bodies are tied into complex machineries generating biometric evidence of who we are and where we belong. We carry the border with us. Less easily mobile than most, migrants and refugees are confronted by a proliferation of fences and camps, so many border zones. Like borders, migrants also generate a misleading sense of the fixity of the places they move between. As Nail argues, the apparent stability of these places is only sustained in contrast to the more noticeable movement of figures like migrants. The mobility of migrants and that of the world need to be considered together. Migrants are one of the most telling indicators of a broader mobility. The films ask questions about how national and European borders are being reworked after the fall of communism and the enlargement of the EU. Tracking embodied individuals as they work and move across borders, they foreground bordering as a process, with the sifting, ranking, and constraint of flows that it involves. They deal with material bodies moving through concrete spaces, as film can, rather than migration and borders as abstract concepts. Crucially, they use the movement of migrants to reveal the movement of our world, rather than to create an illusionary and dangerous sense of a fixed national or European belonging. It's a Free World tells us immediately that the world has changed. As it begins, its heroine, a worker's daughter, is in Poland, recruiting migrants to do unskilled work in the UK. She collects a fee in the process, the flow of people generating a flow of money, protecting her from the hardship and unemployment that the Poles are seeking to escape. Not only are the Poles geographically mobile, they must also accept a shifting sense of self. They will not be able to do their old jobs in the UK. Working by the day or the hour, they have to accept the radical flexibility that Angie, the heroine, is seeking to avoid. Angie's father represents an earlier stage of the British working class. He expects workers to receive at least the minimum wage and is shocked to see migrants queuing for work that may not be given. But the relative stability he knew has gone. A creature of the new, Angie is constantly on the move. A telling symptom of this mutation is the shifting use of the film's pub. The pub is a classic symbol of an apparently unchanging British communal culture. Angie gives it a new role. She uses its car park as a base from which to hire and send out migrants to companies. No longer a communal centre, it becomes a node in a mobile economy of unstable migrant employment. The film initially holds out the possibility of a symbolic pan-European romance between the heroine and a young Pole. Angie's angry protest at sexual harassment and resultant loss of her job creates a potential for solidarity with the precariously employed Pole. Instead, as the film ends, she travels to the UK to employ illegal migrants. More vulnerable than the legal ones, illegals are more docile and exploitable, and consequently sought by unscrupulous employers. This treatment shows how border porosity plays a key role in producing migrant identities. Establishing a hierarchy between those legally and illegally present, it helps allocate people to economic places and differentiate between forms of economic activity and levels of profitability. Angie has been a border agent from the start, rejecting risky illegal workers, deciding who should do which job, separating the lazy from the hard-working, sending some to one job in a white van, others to a different job in a green one. By using the illegality generated by bordering, she adds another profitable category to her sorting. Aware of her mobility and that of the world around her, she can only create a position of relative stability by exploiting flows and participating in the general labor of human categorization. Last Resort is another abortive European romance involving a single mother, this time a Russian. The film shares elements of the British social realist tradition with Loach's film, but also has a distinctly different dreamlike quality, not least because its heroine is wedded to a doomed dream of Britain from which she will have to awake. The opening sequence, with its movement from a tunnel towards a bright sky, suggests a movement away from sleep, but also suggests a fantasy of a completely open space. Borders and obstacles soon appear and begin to sort and direct the material and human flows that pass through the airport. Tanya's son, Artyom, steps over an unseen line at passport control and is told to step back, positioned as one who may not have the right to enter. Tanya is questioned in an enclosed space whose windows resemble prison bars. She and Artyom are sent to a holding area and find themselves next to a black woman. In a post-communist, apparently open Europe, part of the process of bordering is to decide where to put non-EU white Europeans. This, as the proximity to the black woman suggests, is a form of racialization, something confirmed in the detention center where, despite her attempts to escape, Tanya repeatedly finds herself grouped with various non-Europeans. At the same time, her possessions are inspected and classified. A valuable fur is held up as something strange and confirms her exotic difference. Family photographs are transformed into evidence of an illicit desire to stay rather than a tourist visit. Tanya's face is repurposed as a mobile sign of identity in a broader network of control. The economic function of bordering is underlined when classified as an asylum seeker. Tanya can only work in the illegal economy and is recruited by an online pornographer. She cannot travel, but her image can circulate via a global communication network. Turned into a commodity, she is reclassified again, this time as a fantasy schoolgirl, a reinvention forced upon her by material need and the border's institutional power. But again, it is not just the migrants that move. The world, or in this case Britain, also moves, as the quote from Kevin Foster notes. The title of Pawlikowski's film, Last Resort, refers to Tanya's desperation. It also suggests the death of the British holiday resort and the hollowing out of British society. The film was shot in Margate, the site of the Dreamland Fun Fair, where Lindsay Anderson shot his famous 1953 documentary, Oh Dreamland, about the holidaying working class. The fun fair now lies empty, the workers long since vanished. The resort is a desolate shell. The grey skies suggest permanent gloom. At the same time, the way in which the town has become a camp suggests a broader secularization of the nation, less a home than a place of enclosure and suspicion. The tower block where Tanya is housed is symbolically as resonant as the pub in Loach's film. Such blocks once carried a promise of a better life for the British working class. part of a shared dream of a more equal and inclusive society. Here, they've become decaying accommodation for temporarily immobilized migrants. Underlying Tanya's own immobilization, the block has obvious echoes of the brutalist architecture we used to associate with the Soviet Union. Tanya's immobilization shows that the world has moved on. Tanya finally escapes. Fully awake after her British dream, her recalcitrant mobility reminds us that migrants are not simply sorted and ranked by the bordering process, but can also challenge it. Resistant movement is also part of the movement of the world. But despite their mobility, neither Tanya nor Loach's Angie seem able to break out more meaningfully, and Angie's resistance contributes actively to the wider processes that render her own condition unstable. Films can use migrants to point to the processes of bordering and the movement of the world. They cannot find easy solutions for us.